Welcome to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pine Spring in Eureka Springs. The following was recorded October 2nd, 2024. And now here's Zeek Taylor to introduce the program.
My co-producer Sandra Spotts and I welcome you to Homegrown Tales. Sandra and I are thrilled to be joined by guest storytellers Judy Montgomery and Valerie Fondetti.
Everybody, thanks for coming out. So glad to see you. I want to remind you that the stories that you're going to hear tonight are all true stories, lived and written by the people who will be telling them to you tonight. Our guest musician tonight is Tim Hillwood. We're so excited to have him. Gorgeous music if you've never heard him before. He's a local musician. He plays original guitar compositions that span genres of jazz to melodic ballad to folk, and some pieces that flirt with classical. I like that. Tim and his wife Rebecca have lived near Eureka Springs for almost 6 years, and he regularly plays at one of the historic hotels and festival events around the town. The music is designed to inspire and uplift the spirit, and it does. I can tell you it does. Now here's Tim Hillwood.
Let's hear it again for Tim. That's great. Our first reader tonight is my friend Sandra. Sandra Spotts has written for several Central Arkansas publications and made 12 appearances telling her original stories on the internationally broadcast radio show Tales from the South. Sandra has a background in fine arts that began with work as a fiber artist. She has been an art teacher and has worked as a professional designer. For the past several years, she has called Eureka Springs home, where she continues her art career as an abstract expressionist painter. Here is Sandra.
Thank you, Zeek. I've read this story. It's kind of an encore story for Tales, but I think of this story every fall, beginning of the fall, and I have for the last 60 years, and you'll see why. It's called Walking to Camelot. The excitement grew as the Little Rock Central High Marching Band played and the presidential helicopter touched down on the fairgrounds. In those innocent days, we were allowed to get amazingly close to the charismatic president, separated only by a chain link fence. The school year at Little Rock Central High had barely begun when, on that September day, afternoon classes were suspended. John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was coming to visit our town. He was the first who didn't seem old and who addressed the youth in a way that made us feel so valued and so full of promise. His youthfulness made the 3 years that separated him from my dad seem like a whole generation. The majority of the student body walked to the fairgrounds to witness the brief stop that President Kennedy would make on a trip to dedicate a new dam system. Wanting to look my best, I wore my newest outfit and brand new leather shoes with no socks. The 1 mile walk soon had rubbed huge blisters on both of my feet. Through the discomfort, I listened to the president's speech, but I really didn't take in what he had to say. I was so giddy with the excitement of seeing this man in person that I could scarcely focus on his message. The glow of that special visit was still with me on November 22nd, 1963. The halls were filled with students banging locker doors and hurrying to class after lunch. As we neared the classroom, teachers stood with somber faces quietly sharing the news. The president has been shot. Come in and sit down. Surely, I thought, it must just be a wound in his arm or something, just a nick. He will recover. I noticed a handsome upperclassman that I had a crush on skipping down the hall in celebration of the horrific news, apparently in resentment of the president's commitment to racial harmony. Instantly, I felt nothing but repulsion for this once appealing young man. Mrs. Ryman hurried us into the geometry classroom, where we sat in stunned silence. Soon, the announcement came over the static-laced intercom. Students, the President of the United States has died. Please rise for a moment of silence. I stood with wobbly knees in disbelief and looked out the window to the front lawn to watch as the U.S. flag was lowered to half-staff. We were later dismissed to the auditorium to watch the scant coverage of the confused aftermath on a television with rabbit ears. This awful event took place on a Friday, and that meant we could be with our families for the weekend to absorb all that had happened. Church services were immediately scheduled throughout Little Rock. My sister came home from college, and we all attended a special service at our church. Bells tolled all over town. A few days later, we watched on TV as the world paid its last respects to the president. We had personal concerns about the young widow having to go through the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday, and our hearts broke when the little 3-year-old saluted his father's coffin as it was carried down the street on the horse-drawn caisson. The little red scars that resulted from wearing my brand new shoes to see President Kennedy on that autumn day would remain on my feet for decades. Often, I touched them, sadly remembering the terrible scar that was inflicted on our nation and how quickly we lost Camelot. And it still gets to me to this day. Next up is Zeek Taylor, who is a recipient of the Arkansas Governor's Art Award for Lifetime Achievement. Best known as a visual artist, he is also a storyteller and writer. He has performed on the NPR show Tales from the South. A StoryCorps interview with Zeek is on file in the Library of Congress, and a segment of the interview aired on NPR's Morning Edition. He is the author of 4 books that include Chimps Having Fun and Out of the Delta, the anthology. Zeek has also done film work and has appeared in commercials, documentaries, a short film, and a full-length feature film. Here's Zeek.
Thank you. Haunted, who you gonna call? Like most kids, I was terrified and fascinated at the same time by the possible existence of ghosts. There were times at night alone in my dark room when I would refuse to open my eyes for fear of seeing a spirit. As an added protection to avoid a sighting, I slept with a pillow on top of my head. The scariest room in the house where I grew up was far from my bedroom. The room was my mother's beauty shop. Originally, it had been the front parlor of the old house that was built in 1900. A few years before my parents bought the house, a distant relative took her life in that room. The night of her suicide, the young lady coiffed her hair, put on makeup, and donned her finest dress before putting a pistol to her temple and pulling the trigger. She wanted to look good when her body was discovered. My grandmother had a photograph of the deceased. She had been a lovely young woman, and the image of her beautifully posed in the picture was imprinted in my mind. I knew I would recognize her if I saw it, but I did not want to see her. I wish that I had not seen her photo and that my parents had not told me about the suicide. I would not enter the beauty shop at night without turning on the lights and giving the spirit of the young lady ample time to leave the room. My grandmother, who lived a few blocks from my family, had a possibly haunted room in her home. The front bedroom of the house was where her father, my great-grandfather, had died. I was 13 at the time. Along with other family members, I spent time sitting in the room during his passing. I have vivid memories of the morning. A raspy sound came from the old gentleman's throat. The old-timer said it was the death rattle, and he would soon be gone. He died later that day in his bed. Following his death, my grandmother laid out his body in the very room where he had passed. The body remained there for 2 days prior to the burial. All furniture in the room had been removed. Mirrors were covered with black fabric, and folding chairs lined the walls for the mourners to sit on. The casket was left open for viewing of the deceased. A steady stream of visitors came through the front door of the house. Every woman who entered carried prepared food. The dining table, kitchen table, and all the countertops were covered with pies, cakes, and casseroles. The viewing room was constantly occupied. Volunteers sat wait during the night. It was disrespectful to leave the body unattended. The only time the room was cleared to mourners was during the daily visits of the undertakers who freshened my great-grandfather's makeup. Long after his body left the room, I had the feeling that my great-grandfather's spirit was still in there. I never again went into that room at night, even with the light on. Even though I had loved my great-grandfather, I didn't want to experience an after-death visit with him. It was many years later before I again thought about the possibility of seeing a ghost. I bought a house in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. The town's reputation as a location with a sizable spirit population is part of the village's attraction. I enjoyed hearing stories from locals who told of eerie encounters. Even after hearing the ghost stories, I hadn't particularly worried that the home I had purchased could be haunted. One night while I was sound asleep, I felt someone on top of me. I was underneath the covers and barely able to move while a spirit being held me down. I was not afraid. I was furious. I forced my way up while screaming, "Get out of here. This is my house," and that was that. There was no further encounters. I don't know if the experience had been real or if I had been dreaming. In my mind, the event did happen. Since that time, I no longer fear ghosts, imagined or real. I can shout them away. I no longer cover my head with a pillow. I ain't scared. Thank you. Our next speaker is Valerie Fondetti. Valerie was born in Los Angeles, California, but raised 120 miles north in Bakerfield, a farming community in the southern Central Valley, raised by an atheist, truck-driving dad, and a stay-at-home mom who joined a religious cult that tore the family apart. After a successful career in national sales management, Valerie retired to Eureka Springs, Arkansas. There she decided to author No White Lily, a novel of creative nonfiction about her life as a Jehovah's Witness and her not-too-graceful escape into a world she knew nothing about. Valerie organized and met with other writers in the back room of the local Pizza Hut twice a month to encourage each other's efforts with open mics and writing workshops until COVID shut it down. She continued to host a critique circle, however, and in its 6th year produced 3 novels. The local newspaper publishers published 2 of Valerie's short stories, The Brown Box and Aftershock. When she's not writing, she makes sourdough bread, should have brought some, an equally frustrating endeavor for her. Here is Valerie.
First, I just want to thank Zeek and Sandra for letting me join them tonight. This is a real privilege. And you can rest easy. This is not a story of me growing up a Jehovah's Witness. Completely different. You can all relax. I noticed it when I moved into my new home. It was the dead of winter in the Ozarks. Outside the glass door that opened from the living room to the deck, on top of the rain gutter's downspout, there was an empty nest. The birds that built it weaved pine needles and grass and held it together with mud or spit or both. I wondered if they would return. In early spring, the two birds I didn't recognize took turns flying back and forth to do what looked like minor repairs to the nest. They were small, ordinary birds with gray bodies and white breasts. Their tail feathers bounced up and down, and sometimes sideways when they perched. Even though I had lived in the area for 12 years, I'd never seen these birds before. A friend told me they were phoebes. From the comfort of my living room, I had a bird's eye view, of their comings and goings. After a few weeks of repairs, they took turns spending time in the nest. It was adorable to watch them feed each other. Right away, I started to suspect there might be eggs, but unable to see inside, I held my cell phone above it and snapped a photo when they were gone. There, at the bottom, were 4 small white eggs. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I named them Mr. and Mrs. Phoebe. 2 weeks went by when I observed Mrs. Phoebe perched on the side of the nest, dip her head in what looked like feeding behavior. Maybe the eggs have hatched? At this point, I didn't want to get too close to the nest, so I waited patiently until one day a small head with a cavernous mouth popped up as Mrs. Phoebe approached with a juicy and delicious, I assume, winged insect in her beak. Then 2 heads, 3, then 4. I doubt a nest of phoebes has ever been watched as closely as this one, and I grew to love them. And I worried. I worried they might not be getting enough food. I worried about Mr. and Mrs. Phoebe staying healthy. I even made plans on how I might be able to take care of the babies in case a disaster befell the parents. Heating pad, soaked kibble, Q-tips, eyedroppers. I even put out a bowl of water in case they got thirsty. I worried that the large dominant hatchling I named Ozzy would eat all the food and kick out the runt I named Pee-wee. I had heard of such a thing happening. But they grew and thrived until they barely fit in the nest anymore. They flapped their wings furiously and jostled for position, but no one fell out. It seemed to me they were only a day or 2 from fledging, and I couldn't wait to see it. One afternoon, I poured a glass of wine and prepared for an hour of Judge Judy, my guilty pleasure. I was all snuggled in on the sofa when something outside the glass door caught my eye. I looked over and felt a fist hit me in the chest. No! No, 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 no! Moving rapidly toward the nest, a 5-foot black snake slithered up the wall. I instinctively knew why it was there. I ran to the door horrified. I wanted to open it and stop what was about to happen, but I was paralyzed with visceral fear. I didn't know what kind of a snake it was or if it was venomous, but none of it mattered in the end. It was too late. The snake had reached its goal. I'm still emotional about this. The babies flapped their wings frantically but couldn't fly away. They shrieked a warning call. Responding, Mr. and Mrs. Phoebe dive-bombed the snake over and over in an attempt to stop the attack. But in response, the snake raised its head and lunged menacingly forward, scattering them. Within moments, the snake engulfed the nest with its body and swallowed 3 of the babies. The 4th, Ozzy, fell out of the nest to the concrete below. Mr. and Mrs. Phoebe and I watched as the snake dropped to the deck floor and ate Ozzy in 4 large gulps. Then, as quickly as the snake arrived, it slithered across the deck and down the stairs, full. I felt sick. I raged. I cried. Those little Phoebes had a good life ahead of them, a lifelong mate, babies twice a year, an annual vacation in southern Mexico, gone in such a horrible tragedy. I was emotionally devastated for days. Now, before you call me a city slicker, I grew up in Bakersfield, California, a farming community in the southern part of the Central Valley. Daddy raised rabbits and chickens in the backyard and regularly slaughtered them for dinner. And when we came up short, he hunted jackrabbits, quail, and ducks. I watched as he field dressed his kills. Bleed, skin or pluck, gut, clean. I remember how hypnotic it was to watch him take a long drag of a cigarette until the tip glowed red, then take it from his mouth and apply it to the pin feathers to burn them off. The process produced a not unpleasant sizzle. None of it bothered me in the least. I understood the roles of predator and prey. To survive, the predator must kill, and to conserve energy and ensure success, they choose the young, the old, and the infirm of animals less powerful than themselves. I get it. The snake was just being a snake. It's natural, necessary, cruel. I learned the snake was a non-venomous rat snake. It's a desirable snake to have around, the source said, because they eat rats and mice. Well, that's good, I thought. But baby birds? While the parents watched, helpless to do anything about it? Then I asked myself if I was an animal racist. There was no way around it. I was biased and confused about how Mother Nature worked and where we fit in. As I lay in bed that night, I walked around the landscape of my mind and tried to figure it out. It was a never-ending loop of confusion, one thought after another leading nowhere, each to a dead end. But the next morning, a harmless cellar spider crawled across the bathroom counter while I brushed my teeth. It looked at me. I looked at it. On any other morning, I would have scooped it up with a tissue and flushed it down the toilet. But that morning, I coaxed it into a water glass and deposited it outside to live another day. Maybe it had babies to take care of. As I stepped back inside the house, I turned to wish the spider well, pleased with myself. The cellar spider hung from Mrs. Phoebe's beak as it struggled to free itself. Natural, necessary, cruel. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. I want you to welcome Zeek back to the mic. He's got another great story for us.
We'll see about that.
It will.
I almost saw Kim Novak. In the small Delta town where I grew up, there was a movie theater that seated less than 100 people. For a town with a population of 650, that was plenty large enough. For a special end-of-the-school year treat, the town's elementary students were bused to the theater for a showing of Black Beauty. The feature film was the same each year, and it was preceded by Little Rascal's short film, The Kid from Borneo. The short featured a crazed jungle native chasing the rascal kids while yelling, "Yum yum, eat 'em up." It was both scary and funny. The main attraction, Black Beauty, was about a horse, and the movie was wrought with drama and suspense. Fortunately for the young audience, the movie had a happy ending. I only got to attend the special showing 2 or 3 times before the theater closed. A large fancy movie house, the Capitol Theater, was 10 miles down the road. The screen was much larger than the one that had been in my hometown's little theater. The seats were very plush. When Elvis started making movies, the Capitol Theater would premiere his holiday release on Thanksgiving afternoons. We always attended that premiere. Following a midday holiday dinner, my father would drive the family to the theater, let us off, and he would be waiting to pick us up after the movie ended. With the exception of seeing Gone with the Wind, my father never attended an indoor movie. However, he did see films when he took the family to the Sunset Drive-In movie in nearby Paragould. I think he was willing to go to the drive-in because he could take a bottle of whiskey to sip on. My mother made snacks for us to munch. However, as kids, we wanted to go to the concession stand for popcorn, Cokes, and the Big Deal pickles. I loved the movies, but even more I enjoyed playing on the playground that was set in front of the movie screen. The minute the car stopped, my sisters and I would make a beeline for the playground, knowing that we had limited time to play before the movie started. We liked to whirl around on the spinning disc we called a merry-go-round. During the hot summer months, the car windows had to remain down. My father would buy a citronella incense swirl repellent. When lit, it kept the mosquitoes at bay. On the 4th of July, there was a special fireworks display between the double features at the Sunset Drive-In. As a teen, I continued going to the drive-in with my friends. One weekend, there was a scheduled showing of the double feature of Kim Novak movies. She was a very popular actress at the time. The owner of the drive-in ran ads in the local paper that said Kim Novak would be there and would make a special appearance between the two movies. I was very excited as I had not seen a famous person. My friends and I arrived very early and got in a long line of cars. Soon the drive-in was filled to capacity. We anxiously awaited the end of the first feature and the appearance of Miss Novak. After the first movie ended, most folks left their cars and headed for the concession stand where the star was to make her appearance on the roof. The owner of the drive-in appeared on the roof. He was accompanied by his young daughter. His last name was Novak, and his daughter's name was Kim. The crowd went berserk when they realized the little girl was the Kim Novak that had been advertised to appear. I feared that the man and the kid was not going to get off the roof alive. People were screaming and yelling while throwing wadded-up paper cups and popcorn boxes at the two Novaks. Folks got back into their cars and started honking the car horns. Everyone was mad as hell, and several cars peeled out. Quite a few speakers were torn from metal poles. Many of the moviegoers demanded refunds as they exited. I learned one thing that night. If you promise folks Kim Novak, then it better be Kim Novak. The real Kim Novak. Whatever you promise, it's best to deliver. Thanks. And once again, I'd like to welcome my friend Sandra Spotts back to the stage.
This is called Buddies. Bo has always been embedded in my first memories of home, family, neighborhood, and play. His family and mine were next-door neighbors when each of us was born. He came first the year before me. I can't remember ever not playing together. We were each other's first friend. In summertime, he sauntered over to our yard daily, shirtless and barefoot, always with a stick or slingshot or spyglass in his hand, ready to pretend whatever scenario we cooked up for the day. In the winter, we were bundled but still played, relegated to the outside as kids were in the 50s. When the few other neighborhood kids weren't around to explore the vacant lot or to play ball, it was still Sandra and Bo, two buddies, inseparable. We spent our days digging shards of blue willow china out of my yard, remnants of some other child's tea set. We brewed acorn coffee if the trash barrel was still burning, or chewed on wild asparagus from the vacant lot. We walked the block to Rushing's, our neighborhood mom and pop store, to buy thread for my mother or to charge cigarettes for Bo's mom, or to check whether the rare treat blueberry popsicles had arrived. Boredom never existed. Sometime during our upper elementary years, Bo's grandmother died, and soon his family moved into her home just around the corner. The move, along with our progression into preteen years, reduced our playtime mostly to backyard softball and walks home from school. But we were still two buddies. With spring came the news of the 6th grade dance organized by moms held at a small country club. A call from Bo's mother to mine brought the exciting news that Bo was inviting me to be his date for the event. Hubbub, teasing, and excitement ensued in my home. My mother, a meticulous seamstress, planned a trip to the fabric shop. We selected orchid-dotted Swiss fabric and a dress pattern that I was sure would be a little risque and off the shoulder and oh so Audrey Hepburn. Instead, it was more Shirley Temple, sitting appropriately high on my 10-year-old body. Well, a girl could dream. Sister and I watched our local TV dance party to rehearse the latest rock and roll moves. Beau's mom called to ask my mother the color of my dress. I would receive my first corsage, an item I kept in my scrapbook for decades, until it finally fell apart with age. The night of the dance, the two buddies greeted each other shyly with sweaty palms, as dressed up as we had ever been together. Beau's mother drove us to the dance, which went as most preteen dances did. The boys huddled in one end of the ballroom, kicked off dress shoes, and in sock feet held sliding competitions on the glossy hardwood floor. The girls clustered on the opposite side, admiring dresses, comparing corsages, and giggling at the bravado of the boys. After the dance, we were two tired buddies driven home with Hawaiian punch mustaches and aching feet. No kisses were shared or hands held, maintaining the sanctity of our buddy status. Years rolled by as Beau and I entered high school. Life changed, each of us busying ourselves with our own activities and new circles of friends. Each of our families moved from our old neighborhood to separate subdivisions into ranchers. Our contact was reduced to friendly highs when we passed in the school hallways. I did take notice of how tall and handsome and surrounded by girls my buddy had become. Decades passed while we each lived our lives and lost track of each other. It was not until our retirement years that we discovered each other on a social media post recalling memories of our old neighborhood. We found that I had recently moved to the area where Beau's mother-in-law lived and where they made frequent trips to visit with her. We arranged a meeting between Beau, his wife, and myself. I wore a blue dress just as I had in a snapshot of us so many decades ago. We visited, exchanged fond memories, and caught up on the many years that had flown by. We reenacted the photo in which I prissily held out my dress. We were now in our late 60s, still two very old buddies. Thank you. Judy Montgomery has lived in Arkansas her whole life and in Eureka Springs since she was 27. Her earliest conscious memory is being in the big platform rocker with her baby brother as their mother read to them on her lap. She comes from a long line of storytellers and is delighted to carry on with stories of her own, and we're delighted to have her here. Judy.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here, too. I did want to tell you all that many of you know Crescent Dragon Wagon, and I took a writing class from her last year. And she's a fantastic teacher and was great at eliciting words from all of us. But during that whole 8-week class, she used in some form as a writing prompt, pie, P-I-E, pie. And it kind of made me crazy because I was trying to lose weight. But anyway, about the third class or so, when I got done with class that evening, I started this story, and it just poured forth, and it's become its own entity. I do want to make a quick disclaimer. It does refer to violence and to drug use. Hank and the Lemon Icebox Pie. It was July in southeast Arkansas, hot and humid. The year was 1996. Daddy was dying of terminal cancer, but still at home for a little longer. Mother was hospitalized at midnight for an as yet undiagnosed medical condition, one that was exacerbated by stress. My sister called me at 6 a.m. to ask me to spell her. She was up all night and exhausted. She had been there all week and was more than ready to fly home to her husband and young son. So I left work, grabbed my pre-packed bag, and drove the 300 miles, arriving in time for a status report before she went to the airport. Our younger brother from Tulsa arrived late Thursday night with Hank, his 7-year-old son. And our older brother was due by the weekend. We were all rallying from distant points to help our parents as much as we could. Now, my parents were much beloved in their small town. Ladies from the First Baptist Church had been bringing food to the back door for weeks. So we had plenty of home cooking to eat that Friday evening. Leaving his son in my care, my brother went to visit old friends in town. Hank was so sweet and helpful. I told him that after we fed everybody else supper, he and I would clean up Grandma's kitchen and then sit down for a piece of lemon icebox pie. "What's lemon icebox pie?" he asked. I was aghast. "Did you see the pie Mrs. Maxine brought today?" Poor kid had never tasted this old Southern favorite made with Eagle brand sweetened condensed milk and lemon juice poured into a graham cracker crust. Mrs. Maxine was a dear friend of Mother's, one of the many angels who showed up whenever we needed her that summer and fall. She made everything from scratch, but always handed her dishes to us with the disclaimer, "This may not be fit for y'all to eat." Translation, guaranteed to be delicious. As promised, we sat down at the clean kitchen table and cut into the pie. I still smile when I recall the beaming expression on Hank's face after his first bite. That was before. Before Hank thought kitchen work was beneath him. Before court-ordered addiction treatment between his junior and senior year of high school. Before he dropped out of football, a sport he loved and excelled at, when the coach found cigarettes in his locker and issued an ultimatum. Before his teetotaling grandma asked about the logo on his t-shirt, one she didn't recognize. "My liquor store gave it to me because I'm such a good customer," he said. He was 22. Before he repeatedly stole the bulbs from his dad's front porch light to make meth pipes. Before he lost his job after a drug-induced seizure at work. Before he was arrested for driving with no license and his four-wheel drive truck he and his dad had completely restored together was impounded. Before he was wearing ragged clothes that hung off his once full frame. Before. 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 Before he was stabbed in the neck multiple times, then shot 5 times in his own living room by a man he knew. An ex-con member of the Aryan Brotherhood. Before his dad held him as he bled and told him he loved him. Before he died in the same Tulsa hospital where he was born. Before we buried him when he was 24 years old. All after that night in the kitchen on Walnut Street when sweet Hank Boy said, "That's the goodest crust I ever ate."
Well, we thank all of you, and we hope you'll come again for our next Tales. December 6th. Just check your Facebook to see who and what, but we hope you'll come and join us. And here's Zeek.
If I can get the tears out of my eyes, I'll thank you for coming tonight. We had some great storytellers, Valerie and Judy and Sandra Spotts. Glad you were here. Thanks everyone for coming.
You've been listening to Homegrown Tales, a live storytelling event held at Brews, 2 Pine Spring in Eureka Springs. Join us again next time for more Homegrown Tales.